Layers are incredibly useful in Visio. What we can do is we can take a page and we can add layers to that page. It can, at the simplest form, have a background layer and a foreground layer, and we can therefore manipulate shapes that belong to different layers really easily. Let's take this page for example. On the Home tab, to the far right is a Layers button, and if we go into Layer Properties, we can establish some layers. I'm going to click the button New to create a new layer, and I'm going to call it Background. And OK. I'm then going to create another new layer and call it Foreground. And OK. Now we've got a number of options here. First of all, 0 shapes are assigned to the background layer and 0 shapes are assigned to the foreground layer. Both the foreground and the background layers are both visible, and should I go print, both layers would print. What we have to do is we have to make sure that one layer is active. So I'm going to make it that the foreground is active, and I'm going to click OK. I'm then going to assign each shape to its particular layer. And in fact, let's go Control A to select all shapes, and then let's go to the Layers button and assign to a particular layer. And we'll assign these to the foreground layer, and OK. So now we've got a number of shapes assigned to the foreground. Now let's switch to a different layer. I'm going to go to the Layers Properties. I'm going to make the foreground no longer active, and it has 15 shapes assigned. I'm actually going to make it not even visible. I'm going to make the background visible and active, and I'm going to click OK. So now I'm just looking at just the background layer, and I'm going to create something that I want to appear in the background. So I might just decide I'll go to my tools and add some text, and I'll click and I'll type confidential. I might then press escape, and I'll actually rotate confidential slightly on its side, and I'll increase its font size. I may even stretch it and move it into the middle of the page. And so effectively it's almost like a watermark. Oops, excuse me, put my pointer tool on and increase the font size further. Now 60 seems to be the highest listed, so I'm going to type 100. So just because 100 is not listed doesn't mean you can't have it. I'm also going to change the text color to maybe a grey. And so there's my background. Let's go back to our layers. If I go to Layers and Layer Properties, I might decide to see both layers and make my foreground active again and my background not active, and OK. So now I can see the combination of both layers. If I was to go back into the Layer Properties, so we understand, I think we have one shape assigned to the background, 15 shapes to the foreground. Both layers are now visible, though we have looked at just making the background visible. If we went print, both would print, but if I didn't want to print confidential, I would simply take that off and it would only print what was in the foreground layer. The active layer, of course, is the layer that you're currently assigning and working with. And to lock means that if I was to lock the background and go OK, it makes it impossible for me to select the objects in the background because they're locked. So it makes it really easy for you to work with objects in the foreground without having to try and not select something that's in the background because it's locked. So if I have a picture or something in the background that takes up the entire page, I'll often put it in the background, lock it, and that way I can put things on top of it without actually being able to accidentally select or delete the picture in the background. But the layer properties also include things like snap, so you can only snap to objects that are in your layer, and you can only glue to shapes and connect to shapes in your layer. And color simply colors those shapes differently that belong to that layer. So layers are very, very useful for protecting and working with shapes in different layers and being able to make them visible or not, or print or not, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to click OK. And lastly, there's a couple of little extra things like being able to crop and being able to run a spell check. So for example, if I have a shape such as this and I want to crop some of the right or left hand side, I would simply go to my cropping option, which you'll find under your Picture Tools Format tab in the ribbon. But the pure name Picture Tools Format implies that you are actually working with a picture. So let's turn this particular shape into a picture. I'm just going to cut this shape and I'm going to go to paste and paste special, and I'm going to paste it as a picture and OK. Now that Visio believes that this shape is now actually a picture, I can do things with the Picture Tools Format tab, such as crop. And if I click on the crop tool, I can therefore take off some of this excess yellow on the left hand side and some of the excess yellow on the right hand side. Excuse me. And then simply hit the crop tool button again, and we've cropped that picture. I could also crop some of the bottom just by dragging that up and cropping again. So to crop is to remove part of a picture, and if it happens to be a shape, then you'll have to copy or cut and paste it as a picture in order to crop some of that shape off. The spell check I think is quite straightforward. We have a button on our quick access toolbar called spelling. The shortcut key is the function key F7, but you can also go to the review tab in the ribbon and run the spelling checker that way as well. And if there are any spelling errors, it will bring them to your attention. I don't happen to have any, so I'll check the remaining of my document and it says the spell check is complete. But if you did have any spelling errors, it would bring them to your attention and you would have the option to ignore them, to fix them, change them, and so on.